The VLAN trunking protocol, VTP, or how can something so simple become occasionally so complex? The basic operation of VTP is very simple. The reason we're going to run it, very simple, as you'll see. It's working with the different versions and the different modes that can trip you up a bit, but we're going to cover all of those in detail here in this section of the course because we're looking at 3 different versions now and we're looking at 4 different modes. And we'll see them all in action, maybe not VTP version 1. We'll talk a little bit about it, but we're not going to spend much time there because as you can expect with something that's already gone to version 2 and version 3, there's not a whole lot left to recommend version 1. What we're going to do is stick with our 2-switch network for right now. One of our examples will have an additional switch. And not even worry about connected hosts because the VLAN trunking protocol is going to run strictly over our trunks. We are looking only at switch-to-switch connections. The hosts don't even get involved. Also, both switches are at their default setting and any config changes or any config from previous chapters or labs has been removed. In the book, if you were kind enough to buy that, I appreciate it, I've removed VLANs 1002 through 1005 from the output of Show VLAN Brief, but of course here on the live equipment we will see it all. So what I'm going to do right now is bring up the live equipment, going to look at both switches, and I haven't created anything yet. The one thing I have done is move VTP to version 2 on both switches. I'll show you exactly how I do that and how to verify it, but right now VTP is not enabled. So hang in there with me on that. Right now, let's go ahead and create VLAN 100 on switch 1. I'm not going to put any ports into it. Of course, if I put ports into a VLAN that hasn't been created yet, as we saw, that VLAN would be dynamically created. But let's do a show VLAN brief. And there it is, VLAN 100. I'm going to go over to our neighboring switch. And we see a whole lot of ports in the default VLAN as we expected, and we don't see anything about a VLAN 100. And there's a good reason for that because right now, without VTP, the only way for switch 2 to know about VLAN 100 is to either manually create it on there, just as we did on switch 1, or to put a port into VLAN 100 on switch 2, which results in that being dynamically created. Now you might say, what's the big deal? You know, is switch 2's ignorance of VLAN 100 really that big a deal? It's not really hurting anything right now, but as our network grows just a bit larger, it does become a problem, as in this scenario. The only way for our 2 hosts in VLAN 100 to communicate, hey, switch 2's got to get involved because there is no trunk between switch 1 and switch 3. So since switch 2 at this point does not know VLAN 100 even exists, that communication can't happen because switch 2 doesn't know how to handle the incoming frames marked with VLAN ID 100, so they're just going to be dropped. Now, of course, in a 3-switch network, you know, you and I, the network admins, we could create VLAN 100 manually on switch 2. Everything would be just beautiful. That would work okay in a 3-switch network. I mentioned that it would work well. I'm not even sure I'd go that far, because what we always want to look for in networking is a scalable solution because we need to assume our networks are going to grow and grow and grow. Just think of the many things that our networks handle as far as traffic goes that they wouldn't even have been asked to handle 7 years ago, or not as much of it. So we're always looking for a scalable solution. Well, statically creating VLANs all over a network, even for a 3-switch network, it's not really the best way to do it. It's not the most efficient way to do it. And a 300-switch network, I mean, forget it. You know, there's just no way because it's not a scalable solution. The more manual configuration you write, no matter how good you are, and I know that you and I are both really good at it, but no matter how good you are, the more of it you write on your own, the larger the chance of a misconfiguration. Of course, it does take more time as well, but then when we finally have that little misconfig come in, then not only are we still doing all this stuff manually, but now we've got some troubleshooting to do, and we have other things we want to spend our time with. Now this is where VTP really comes in handy, because when we put all of our switches, the 3 switches here in this example, into the same VTP management domain, generally referred to as simply a VTP domain. Your switch is going to mention that with show VTP status. It's going to keep mentioning VTP management domain. Actually, show interface trunk will do that. You can call it either. They will exchange information about the VLANs they know about, and all three switches will, by default, have a light view of the VLANs on the network. Now you put all three of those switches into the same VLAN, they talk to each other, they talk to switch 2, and they say, hey, here's a VLAN 100. Oh, okay, well, I'll put that in my little VLAN database, and then we would have that communication with no manual VLAN creation necessary on switch 2. Now, even better, we talk about a scalable solution. As time goes on, you're going to create more VLANs, you're going to delete VLANs, and there's no way, let's pick a happy medium there, 25 switch network. If you're deleting a VLAN, you do not want to go to every single one of those switches and make sure that that VLAN's on there. Or if you delete one, make sure the deletion's done. We're going to let VTP do that work. And the key phrase here, you'll notice that I keep coming back to this, in the same VTP domain. Switches in one VTP domain are not going to exchange VLAN info with switches in another VTP domain. This isn't something like, say, route redistribution. How we can have two OSPF processes, or we could have OSPF and EIGRP running on the same router, and if we wanted to, we could exchange routes between the two. That's not going to happen with VTP, because VTP advertisements, and we're going to go into a lot of detail on those, they're only going to be exchanged between devices sent and forwarded by devices in the same domain. Now, that's not the only bad thing that can happen between trunking switches that aren't in the same VTP domain, as we're going to see live here in just a moment. What I'm going to do is bring the two-switch network up, and we're going to put both switches into the VTP domain CCNP. I do want to run show VTP status here on both switches, and the output's going to be a little different because I want you to see both of these. Now, the information's pretty much the same, it's just in a slightly different location, but it's a really good idea for you to see both of these. So here, let me go over to switch 1, that is, and I'll run show VTP status. This may be the way most of you are familiar with seeing it if you've worked with switches for a while or you've studied for this exam for a while. We've got show VTP status. We've got VTP version. You want to watch this because by default, these switches, Cisco theory holds that VTP switches are going to run in version 1 by default. I've already moved this to 2, but when you look at show VTP status and you get this kind, it's like, okay, VTP version 2. Well, you also have to make version 2 mode enabled, and again, I will show you how to change the version numbers. It's just with the VTP version command. It's as simple as can be, but you want to watch that when it comes to this particular output. But also notice, here's what you got to watch. There's nothing next to VTP domain name. The reason I'm making such a big deal out of this is, I've said this probably 10,000 times in my life, when you run a show command and it doesn't show you anything, there's nothing to show you. And the thing is here, we are getting some information that looks like I'm already running VTP. I got a version, I got a config revision number, I got all this other stuff, but I don't have a domain name. So that means I'm not in a VTP domain yet. VTP is enabled, but I'm not really running it yet. So I'm going to join a VTP domain now. And after all that, the command's pretty simple. VTP domain, you just put it in right there. And changing VTP domain name from null to CCNP, of course, that doesn't mean the VTP domain name was previously null. It means that you weren't in one. I know you know that, but I have to mention it anyway. Now, let's hop over to switch 2. And you'll notice here that the VTP version capable, the output is a little different here. The first switch I showed you was only capable of running versions 1 and 2. This switch, obviously, can run versions 1 to 3. And I did change it before the video started because I wanted to start in version 2. Let me just show you that real quick. I hate to keep mentioning a command and then not show it to you. That's all there is to it. VTP version, and if it just gives you 1 through 2, then those are the only 2 versions you can set it to. So we've got a switch here capable of running 1 through 3. We're running 2, and the domain name is now CCNP. How did this switch join the CCNP domain without me entering VTP domain CCNP? How did that happen? Well, the thing is, I get this email a lot because the first time it happened years ago to me, it surprised me. What happens is, you know those advertisements I've been mentioning and promising more detail on? What happens is when switch 1 joins a VTP domain, it sends a VTP advertisement out. And switch 2 got it because it's the only other switch in the domain, sent it across the trunk. Switch 2 got it, looked at it and said, hey, here's this VTP domain CCNP, and I'm going to join that one. I've got all the information in this advertisement. I'm going to join that. So don't be shocked when that happens. Now, of course, also note the VTP operating mode of server here, and we are going to cover these modes in more detail, but I just want to point that out, that when a switch joins a VTP domain, it's in server mode by default. That's another important default for us to note right now. So we've got this all set up. Now, what happens though? Let's say that you were manually setting it, you didn't notice that it had already dynamically joined the CCNP domain. What happens if I sat down and did this? VT domain CCNP. And you can see I got my little message. Actually, I'm getting a lot of messages right now, or a couple. Changing VTP domain from uppercase CCNP to lowercase CCNP. That's kind of the key right there and why I'm showing you this. And now I'm getting all kinds of stuff. The first one, and the timestamp is long, so it's kind of knocking some of that out. But you can see in the explanation, switch VLAN VTP domain name change. So we really don't need to read the rest of it, but we will. VTP domain name change to CCNP. So far, so good. But just about 15 seconds or so after that, I get these messages, and that's not good. Unable to perform trunk negotiation because of VTP domain name mismatch. This is not really the reason I'm showing you that second VTP domain, but it's a good side effect. I want you to see that live. The real key is here, I want you to note that these VTP domains are case sensitive. If you have an uppercase CCNA domain and a lowercase CCNA domain, they're not the same. If you have an uppercase CCNP domain, which is what we had here, and then a lowercase CCNP VTP domain, they're not the same. They are case sensitive. And that is really the first thing you ought to check if you start seeing messages like this. It's like, well, why aren't these guys exchanging ads? Well, they are technically in different domains even though you entered the same letters. Case sensitivity always comes back to bite you, and there we definitely want to watch that. So what we're going to do in the next video is go forward. We're going to put switch 2 back into the CCNP domain, and then we're going to delve into some of these advertisements and modes. So I'll see you on the next video. We'll hit that.